Welcome to Romeo and Juliet, a timeline of key events. In this video, we'll explore the crucial moments that shape one of the most famous tragedies in literary history, Romeo and Juliet, written by William Shakespeare. From the initial meeting of our star-crossed lovers to the tragic finale, let's take a look at how their fates unfold. The Montagues and the Capulets feud. Our story begins in Verona, a city where a fierce rivalry between the Montague and Capulet families disrupts the peace. The origins of this conflict are unknown, but it fuels ongoing violence and hatred, leading to tragedy. The rivalry sets the stage for Romeo and Juliet's doomed love, as their family's hostility prevents them from being together. This feud is a driving force behind the actions of many individuals, leading to confrontations, conflicts, and ultimately, the lovers' deaths. Only after the tragic events do the families finally reconcile. The tension escalates with a brawl between the Capulet and Montague servants in Verona streets. Benvolio, a Montague, attempts to break it up but is drawn in when Tybalt, a Capulet, intervenes. Meanwhile, Romeo, despondent over his unrequited love for Rosalind, confides in Benvolio, who advises him to move on. At the same time, Paris seeks Juliet's hand, but her father Capulet suggests waiting 2 years, as she is only 14. However, inviting Paris to an upcoming feast, Capulet hopes Juliet will consider him. Romeo decided to attend the feast, but only because Rosalind, whose name he reads on the list, will be there. Juliet, urged by her mother, agrees to meet Paris during the feast to see if she could fall in love with him. The blossom of love and the union of two. Romeo, feeling melancholy, follows Benvolio and Mercutio to the Capulet feast. Once inside, he spots Juliet from across the room and immediately forgets about Rosalind, falling deeply in love with Juliet. While watching her, Tybalt, a Capulet, recognizes Romeo and becomes enraged that a Montague has infiltrated the feast. He prepares to confront Romeo, but Capulet restrains him, insisting there be no violence at the party. Soon after, Romeo and Juliet meet, unaware of each other's identities. They share an instant connection and kiss. But when Romeo learns from the nurse that Juliet is a Capulet, he is distraught. Similarly, Juliet is upset when she discovers that Romeo is a Montague. Unable to leave Juliet behind, Romeo sneaks into the Capulet garden and overhears Juliet speak his name from her balcony. He calls out, and they exchange vows of love under the cover of night. The next day, Romeo seeks out Friar Lawrence, who, despite his surprise, agrees to marry the couple in secret, hoping their union will end the feud between their families. Romeo and Juliet wed in Friar Lawrence's cell, with the nurse procured a ladder to help Romeo's climb into Juliet's window for their wedding night, but happiness soon turns to tragedy. Conflict and tragedy. The next day, Benvolio and Mercutio run into Tybalt, who is still furious that Romeo attended the Capulet feast. Tybalt has challenged Romeo to a duel. When Romeo arrives, he, now related to Tybalt by marriage, pleads with him to delay the fight until Tybalt understands why Romeo refuses to engage. Frustrated by Romeo's attempt to make peace, Mercutio steps in and challenges Tybalt himself. The two begin to duel. Romeo, desperate to stop the fight, tries to intervene by stepping between them, but Tybalt fatally wounds Mercutio under Romeo's arm. In a fit of grief and rage, Romeo kills Tybalt and flees the scene. Shortly after, Prince Aeschylus declares that Romeo is banished from Verona for his crime. Friar Lawrence, understanding the gravity of the situation, arranges for Romeo to secretly spend his wedding night with Juliet before he must leave for Mantua the following morning. Desperation and Plans. In her room, Juliet eagerly awaits Romeo's arrival, but the nurse enters with devastating news. Romeo has killed Tybalt. Distraught, Juliet wrestles with the fact that her new husband has killed her cousin. However, she ultimately decides her loyalty lies with Romeo. That night, Romeo sneaks into Juliet's room, and they finally consummate their marriage. As morning arrives, they say a tearful goodbye, unsure when they will meet again. Soon after, Juliet learns her father now plans for her to marry Paris in just 3 days. Conflicted, Juliet can't reveal her marriage to Romeo, but also refuses to marry Paris. She turns to the nurse for advice, but the nurse tells her to move on from Romeo and marry Paris. Desperate, Juliet seeks Friar Lawrence's help. He devises a risky plan. Juliet will take a potion to appear dead, allowing her family to bury her in the Capulet tomb. Once she awakens, Romeo will come to take her away. However, the wedding is moved up a day. That night, Juliet drinks the potion, and the next morning, the nurse finds her seemingly dead. The Capulets grieve, and Juliet is laid in the tomb, but Friar Lawrence's message to Romeo never arrives. Romeo hears only that Juliet has died. The tragic ending. Romeo, unaware that Juliet's death is a ruse, is heartbroken and returns to Verona determined to join her in death. Outside the Capulet crypt, Romeo encounters Paris. They fight, and Romeo kills him. Inside the tomb, Romeo finds Juliet's seemingly lifeless body, drinks poison, and dies by her side. Moments later, Friar Lawrence arrives, discovering that Romeo has killed Paris and himself. Just then, Juliet awakens. The friar hears the approaching watch and urges Juliet to flee, but she refuses. He leaves her behind as she finds Romeo dead. Hoping to die with him, she kisses his poisoned lips. But when that fails, she takes his dagger and ends her life. The watch arrives, followed by the prince, the Capulets, and Montague. Montague shares the news that his wife has died from grief over Romeo's exile. Overwhelmed by the tragedy of their children's deaths, Capulet and Montague agree to end their long-standing feud. In an effort to honor their lost children, they vow to raise gold statues of Romeo and Juliet in a newly peaceful Verona. The death of Romeo and Juliet finally brings an end to the long-standing feud between the Montague and Capulet families, but at a terrible cost. In Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare presents a timeless tragedy of love caught in the crossfire of conflict. Their story has resonated through the ages, reminding us of the power of love, the weight of a family expectations, and the inevitability of fate. For never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo. Thank you for watching this timeline of Romeo and Juliet. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more literary explorations.